He only wanted a quiet steak at a rundown diner, hidden from the world that chased his money. But when the waitress slipped a folded note onto his plate, 4 words stopped him cold. Words that would change both their lives forever.
Before we continue into the story, kindly write in the comments where you are listening from.
Chapter 1. Ethan's World of Silence. Ethan Cole had mastered the art of being invisible. For a man worth more than most small countries, invisibility was a gift, a shield he clung to. By day, he was the CEO splashed across Forbes covers, dissected by analysts, adored and envied in equal measure. By night, he shed the suit, the chauffeured car, the polished mask. He traded them for worn jeans, an old leather jacket, and anonymity in places where no one knew or cared about his net worth. On this particular evening, the world outside buzzed with Friday night chaos. Luxury restaurants in the city pulsed with life. His name probably murmured in half of them. But Ethan wasn't there. Instead, he parked a dusty rental sedan outside a roadside diner 30 miles from downtown. The neon sign blinked open in weary red letters, buzzing faintly like it was tired of its own job. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee that had been sitting too long and fry grease soaked into every corner. Vinyl booths were patched with duct tape. A jukebox in the corner hummed an old country ballad no one listened to anymore. Ethan stepped in, pulling his cap low. Here, no one saw a billionaire. Here, he was just another man looking for something simple. Maybe a meal. Maybe peace. Maybe the illusion that money hadn't stolen every genuine connection from his life. He slid into a booth by the window. His shoulders dropped, a quiet sigh slipping from him. It was strange, how exhausting it was to be wanted for everything except who he was. Behind the counter, Lila wiped down mugs with a rag so frayed it should have retired years ago. At 24, her face carried a softness that hadn't hardened yet, but her eyes held shadows. Working the late shift wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to cover her younger brother's medication. Barely. She'd long accepted that people rarely noticed her. Customers asked for coffee, burgers, pie, then left without remembering her name. Her life was a cycle of serving, cleaning, scraping tips together, and walking home past midnight to a cramped apartment that smelled of damp walls. Still, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Even exhaustion couldn't dim the warmth in her movements, the way she refilled an old man's cup before he asked, or slid an extra pack of crackers to the single mom counting coins at the register. Lila was tired, but she still gave. When the bell over the door jingled and Ethan walked in, she glanced up. Just another customer, she thought. Ball cap, jacket, tired shoulders. Nothing remarkable. Still, she offered the same soft smile she gave everyone. "Sit anywhere you like," she called. Her voice was gentle, almost musical in its weariness. He chose the booth by the window. She tucked the rag aside, grabbed her pad, and walked over. "What can I get you?" Lila asked, pen hovering. "Steak," Ethan said simply. His voice was low, smooth, almost too polished for this place. "Medium rare, black coffee." Her brow quirked slightly. People usually asked about the specials or ordered burgers. Steak was the priciest thing on the menu. But she only nodded, jotting it down. "Coming right up." As she walked back toward the kitchen, Ethan's eyes followed her briefly. She moved with a quiet efficiency, not rushed, not clumsy. Someone used to carrying more weight than her frame should bear. Something about her tugged at him. But he looked away quickly, pulling out his phone like a shield. For the next 15 minutes, he sat in silence, scrolling through emails he had no desire to answer. Every message was about numbers, acquisitions, strategies. None about people who cared if he ate dinner alone in a diner at 10 p.m. When Lila brought the plate, setting the steak in front of him, their eyes met briefly. Hers were a deep brown, with flecks of amber that caught the light. Tired eyes, but kind. "Need anything else?" she asked. He shook his head. "This is fine." She nodded and stepped away. Ethan cut into the steak mechanically, chewing without really tasting. But he couldn't stop glancing at her, at the way she leaned against the counter when no one was watching, rubbing her temples, the way she laughed politely at a trucker's bad joke, even though the weariness in her eyes didn't match her smile. And then she looked at him, not the way people usually did, not like they wanted something or were guessing the price tag on his jacket. It was a look that lingered a second too long, like she was searching for something behind his lowered cap. It unsettled him. He ducked his head, focusing on his food. But the feeling lingered. When the check came, it wasn't just a slip of paper. Nestled underneath the receipt was a folded napkin, his brows furrowed. He looked up instinctively, but Lila was already walking away, pouring coffee for another table. Heart thudding strangely, Ethan unfolded the napkin. 4 words stared back at him, written in neat slanted handwriting. "Don't give up tonight." For a moment, he just stared. The diner noise faded, the clink of cutlery, the murmur of conversations, the faint hum of the jukebox, all muffled by the thundering of his own heartbeat. He read it again. "Don't give up tonight." His fork froze halfway to his mouth. He didn't know why it struck him so hard. Maybe because no one had said anything that real to him in years. People talked about profits, parties, partnerships, not him. Not the man beneath the armor. He looked up. Lila was at the counter again, scribbling an order, her face composed, as if she hadn't just unraveled him with 4 words. Why had she written it? Could she see something in him? Did he look that broken? Ethan folded the napkin, sliding it into his pocket like a secret he couldn't let go. For the first time in years, the steak in front of him sat forgotten. His chest ached with something unfamiliar, something that felt like being seen. When Lila returned to collect the plate, he searched her face. She didn't mention the note, didn't meet his gaze for long. "Everything okay?" she asked softly, routine in her tone. He wanted to ask why. He wanted to demand, "What made you write that?" But the words lodged in his throat. Instead, he just said, "It was good. Thank you." She nodded, gave the faintest smile, and walked away. Ethan sat frozen for a long moment. Then, slowly, he slid out of the booth, dropped cash on the table, far more than the bill required, and stepped into the night. But the note burned against his chest. 4 words. 4 simple words that refused to let him go. And as he drove away, the neon sign shrinking in his rearview mirror, Ethan Cole knew this night wasn't over, not by a long shot. Chapter 2. Emotional Spark. Sleep never came easy for Ethan, but tonight it was impossible. He lay in his penthouse overlooking the city skyline, a space filled with glass, chrome, and silence. Everything gleamed. Everything was perfect. Everything was empty. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. Lila's quiet hand sliding the napkin beneath the check, the curve of her handwriting, the haunting simplicity of those words. "Don't give up tonight." What did she mean? How could she possibly have known? Because the truth was, earlier that day, Ethan had thought about giving up, on it all. On the endless facade of smiling for cameras, the shallow conversations, the fake friends. Money had bought him power, but it hadn't bought love, trust, or peace. There were nights he wondered if walking away from it all, vanishing, might be easier. And then a waitress who didn't even know his name had written those words. His chest tightened. He had no idea why it mattered so much, but he couldn't ignore it. By morning, when the sunlight bled gold over the skyline, Ethan knew one thing. He needed to see her again. The diner was quieter on a Sunday afternoon. A few families lingered over late lunches. The jukebox played a scratchy Elvis track, and the air smelled faintly of grilled onions. Ethan walked in wearing the same old jacket and cap. He scanned the room instinctively, heart giving a strange kick when he spotted her. Lila was behind the counter tying her apron, her hair pinned up in a messy bun. She looked tired, but the kind of tired that came from working hard, not from giving up. When her eyes lifted and found his, something flickered. Recognition. Surprise. But she didn't rush over. She simply gave a small nod, as though she'd expected him somehow. He slid into the same booth. When she came over with her pad, her tone was neutral. "Steak again?" Ethan's lips twitched. "You remember." "I remember most orders," she said, jotting it down. But her eyes betrayed her. There was a question there, a wariness, maybe even hope. When she turned to leave, Ethan leaned forward slightly. His voice was low, steady. "About the note." Her hand froze for half a second before she kept moving. "I'll put your order in," she murmured, and walked away. Ethan's pulse quickened. When she brought his coffee, he caught her wrist gently before she could retreat. Not forceful, just enough to stop her. Her eyes widened slightly. "Why did you write it?" he asked. His tone was calm, but underneath it was a rawness he couldn't hide. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Finally, Lila exhaled, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you looked like someone who needed to hear it." Ethan's throat tightened. Of all the answers, he hadn't expected that one. She slipped her wrist free, straightened, and added quickly, "I didn't mean anything by it, just sometimes people need a reminder, that's all." And then she was gone again, vanishing into the safety of the kitchen. Ethan sat back, his coffee cooling untouched. Because you looked like someone who needed to hear it. She had seen him. Without knowing his name, his wealth, his mask. She had seen him. It was terrifying. And electrifying. In the kitchen, Lila leaned against the counter, her pulse racing. She hadn't expected him to come back. Men like him, quiet, heavy with unspoken things, they usually disappeared into the night, never to be seen again. But he had returned. And he had asked about the note. Her hands trembled as she tied her apron tighter. What had possessed her to do it in the first place? It wasn't something she did. She wasn't bold. She wasn't reckless. But something about the way he had sat there that night, alone, shoulders bent under invisible weight, had pulled at her. She knew that look. It was the look her father had worn before he walked out for good. The look her brother sometimes wore when he thought his illness was too much for her to handle. A look that whispered of giving up. So she had written the words she once wished someone had written for her. And now he was here, looking at her like she mattered. It scared her, but it also made her feel alive. Back at his booth, Ethan's meal arrived, but once again the steak sat barely touched. He wasn't hungry for food, he was hungry for answers. When Lila refilled his coffee, he asked quietly, "What's your name?" "Lila." "Lila," he repeated, as though tasting the sound. "I'm Ethan." She gave the faintest nod, no recognition in her eyes. She didn't know. She didn't care. "Thank you," he added, her brow furrowed. "For what?" "For writing it." Something softened in her gaze, but she said nothing, simply moving to the next table. Yet the silence between them carried more than words ever could. By the time Ethan left, dusk was painting the sky in shades of rose and violet. He slid a generous tip beneath his plate again, but this time he hesitated before walking out. His eyes lingered on her one last time, Lila wiping down a table, strands of hair falling loose around her face, unaware of the weight she carried in his heart now. As he stepped into the cooling night, the note burned in his pocket like an ember refusing to die. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something stir inside him. Not just curiosity, not just gratitude, hope.
Let's have a quick conversation before we continue into the story. Have you ever had a stranger say something that changed the course of your entire day, or even your life? Something so small, but it stuck with you? Drop your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it.
Chapter 3. Resistance. 2 nights later, Ethan found himself outside the diner again. He told himself it was nothing, just a craving for steak. Just the comfort of a quiet booth in a place where nobody cared about his last name. But deep down, he knew better. He pushed open the door, the bell jingling overhead. Lila was there, scribbling an order for a truck driver. She looked up, saw him, and for the briefest second her lips parted, just slightly, as if surprised he'd come back again. Then the mask fell back in place. "Steak again?" she asked when she came over. He gave a half smile. "Maybe I just like the coffee." Her brows arched. "You'd be the first." The corner of his mouth lifted. There it was again, that invisible pull between them, subtle but undeniable. But Lila quickly straightened, pen poised, businesslike. "I'll put in the order." She was building walls. He could feel it. And the truth was, so was he. In the kitchen, Lila scolded herself. "What are you doing, Lila?" This man, this Ethan, wasn't her world. He wasn't someone she could let herself lean on. She had her brother to care for. Bills piling up, double shifts just to keep food on the table. Men came into diners, said kind words, left good tips. And then they left. Always. That note she'd slipped him, she still wasn't sure why she'd done it. Maybe because he'd looked like someone at the edge. Maybe because she recognized a pain she knew too well. But that didn't mean she owed him anything more. She couldn't afford to let him matter. Back at his booth, Ethan toyed with his fork, trying to pretend he cared about the meal in front of him. He was a man who had closed billion-dollar deals, but here, in a small-town diner, he couldn't string together the right words for one woman, because everything about this felt dangerous. If she knew who he really was, the empire behind his name, the headlines that circled his every move, would she still look at him the same way? Or would she shift, like everyone else, to wanting something from him? She was the first person in years who had looked at him and seen him, not the bank account, not the company, not the articles, and that terrified him. When Lila returned with his plate, he tried again. "You work here every night?" "Most nights," she replied, setting the food down. "That must be hard." She gave a short laugh, though it wasn't exactly amused. "Hard doesn't pay the bills. Work does." Her eyes flicked up, steady, defiant. "So, yeah, I work." Ethan swallowed. He admired her fire even if she wielded it like a shield. "I didn't mean," he started. "Look," she interrupted softly, glancing at the other tables before lowering her voice. "You seem nice, and I'm glad the note meant something, but I shouldn't have written it. So maybe we just pretend it didn't happen, okay?" The words stung more than he expected, but he only nodded. "If that's what you want." Her jaw tightened. "It's what's best." She turned and walked away. Ethan sat in silence, the taste of rejection bitter in his mouth. For the rest of his meal, neither said much. Lila passed by his booth without lingering. Ethan stared out the window at the neon sign blinking against the night sky. He told himself not to come back. He told himself it was safer this way. And yet, when Lila gathered the empty plate and set down the check, their eyes met one last time. For a fleeting second, her guard dropped, and he saw it, something flickering there, a question, a want she was trying desperately to bury. Then she blinked, and it was gone. After closing, Lila sat in the empty diner, head in her hands. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. She shouldn't have let herself care, not even a little. Not about the way his eyes softened when he listened, or the way he carried sadness like it was stitched into his very bones. She had too much to carry already. Dreams cost too much, and she couldn't afford them. Still, as she cleaned the tables and switched off the lights, she caught herself glancing at the booth where he always sat, as if expecting him to still be there, as if secretly wishing he would be. Ethan's driver was waiting outside, but he waved him off. Instead, he walked the long way back through the city streets, hands in his pockets, head heavy. Every instinct told him to walk away, to leave the diner, and the girl, and the note behind. But her words wouldn't let him go. "Because you looked like someone who needed to hear it. He did. He still did. And against his better judgment, Ethan knew he wasn't finished with Lila. Not yet. Chapter 4. Forced Proximity. The night was restless. Thunder cracked over the city, lightning dancing across the clouds as rain pounded down in endless sheets. The diner's neon sign sputtered, flickering in the storm. Inside, Lila was wiping down the counter, grumbling at the weather. Figures, she muttered, glancing at the clock. Nearly midnight. Half an hour until closing. The storm meant no buses would be running, which meant a long walk home in the pouring rain. With her umbrella broken and her sneakers already falling apart, she dreaded the idea. The bell over the door jingled, and of course it had to be him. Ethan stepped in, rain dripping from his jacket, dark hair dampened. His eyes met hers instantly. "You again?" Lila said, raising an eyebrow. "Me again." He slid into his usual booth. "Steak?" "Always." She scribbled the order, trying not to notice how his shirt clung faintly to his chest, how water glistened along his jaw. She had to keep the walls up. The storm worsened. Minutes later, the diner's lights flickered, once, twice, before plunging into darkness. "Great," Lila muttered. "Just great." A dim emergency light glowed near the door, barely enough to see. The fridge's hum died. The neon sign outside fizzled completely. "Looks like you're stuck with me," Ethan said, voice low in the quiet. Lila grabbed a box of matches and lit a candle, setting it on his table. "Lucky you," she replied dryly, though her heart was beating faster. The storm outside roared. Rain hammered against the glass, thunder shaking the windows, and suddenly the world felt small, just the two of them, shadows flickering across their faces in candlelight. By the time the power finally returned, it was past closing. The storm hadn't eased, the rain still relentless. "You can't walk home in this," Ethan said firmly when he saw her grab her bag. "I don't really have a choice." "You do." He stood, pulling out his phone. "I'll drive you." She frowned. "You don't even know where I live." "Then tell me." She crossed her arms. "Why do you care?" His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. "Because I do." Something in the way he said it made her breath hitch, but she shook her head. "No, I don't accept rides from customers." "You'd rather drown out there than let me give you a ride?" She hesitated, and when thunder cracked so loud it rattled the windows, she finally sighed. "Fine, but just a ride." The car was warm, the leather seat soft. Ethan drove smoothly, eyes flicking between the road and her. She sat stiffly, arms folded. "You always this stubborn?" he asked. "You always this pushy?" She shot back. He chuckled. "Fair enough." For a moment the silence stretched, filled only by rain pelting the windshield. Then Ethan asked quietly, "So why the note? Really?" Her stomach tightened. "I told you," she said, staring out the window. "You looked like someone who needed to hear it." "And what does that make you?" She turned, startled. "What?" "Someone who notices. Someone who carries other people's pain as if it's her own." His voice softened. "That's rare." Her throat went dry. She looked away, blinking fast. She couldn't let him see how his words pierced her. "Don't make me into something I'm not," she whispered. When the car pulled up outside her small, worn-down apartment building, Lila was quick to unbuckle. "Thanks for the ride." "Lila," Ethan started, but she cut him off. "Don't read too much into it. Tomorrow you'll go back to your life and I'll go back to mine." He frowned. "You sound like you've already decided what I am." "Rich men, strangers in diners, they always leave." She opened the door before he could answer, and with that she ran inside, slamming it shut against the storm. Upstairs in her tiny apartment, Lila leaned against the door, heart racing. She hated how his words lingered. She hated how she wanted to believe he cared. But more than anything, she hated the fear blooming inside her. Fear of needing someone. Fear of letting herself hope. because hope had burned her before, and she wasn't sure she could survive being burned again. Back in the car, Ethan sat for a long time, staring at the rain-soaked building. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met. And she was right. He did have another life, one she knew nothing about. But for the first time in years, he didn't want to run back to it. For the first time in years, he wanted someone to see past the name, past the empire, past the mask. And she already had. Now he just had to convince her not to shut him out. Chapter 5. Backstory Unveiled. The next evening, Ethan slipped into the diner again. But when he looked around, Lila wasn't there. Instead, a young waitress with red hair handed him a menu. "Lila's not working tonight," she said when she noticed him glance toward the counter. "Not working?" Ethan asked, surprised. She said she had family stuff. Family stuff. The words twisted something inside him. Without thinking, he stood, tossed cash on the counter, and left. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. But the truth was gnawing deeper. He wanted to know her world. Ethan's driver hesitated when Ethan gave the address he'd dropped Lila off at the other night. "Sir, are you sure?" "Yes," Ethan said sharply, though his chest felt tight. The building looked worse in daylight. The bricks were cracked, the windows taped, the front steps uneven. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of mildew, and then he heard it, a boy's laughter. He followed the sound until he reached a cracked open door. Through it, he saw Lila sitting on the floor of a small, dimly lit apartment. Across from her sat a boy, maybe 10 or 11, legs crossed, grinning as they played a board game on the rug. Her whole face was different, softer, brighter. The sight stole Ethan's breath, but when the boy looked up and spotted him, the laughter stopped. "Lila," the boy whispered. Lila turned and froze. Her expression shifted from joy to shock to guarded fear in seconds. "Ethan," she said sharply, standing. "What are you doing here?" I wanted to check on you," Ethan said, suddenly unsure of himself. "You weren't at the diner, so—" "You followed me?" she hissed, stepping into the hallway and closing the door behind her. Ethan raised his hands. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. My brother doesn't need strangers showing up at our door." "Your brother?" Ethan repeated. Her eyes narrowed. "Yes, Jake. He's 11, and he's my responsibility, not yours." Ethan hesitated. "Lila, you don't have to do it all alone." The sharp laugh she gave cut through him. "Yes, I do, because nobody else ever has." And with that, she went back inside, shutting the door firmly in his face. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He poured himself a drink in his penthouse apartment, staring at the skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. But all he saw was Lila's face, and Jake's smile. Family. That word was an ache to him, because once he'd had one too. A younger brother who used to follow him everywhere. A kid who believed Ethan could do no wrong. Until the accident. Until Ethan was too wrapped up in work to notice his brother spiraling. Until one night, a reckless drive ended with twisted metal and silence that no apology could erase. His brother was gone, and Ethan had never forgiven himself. He clenched the glass so hard it nearly shattered. No wonder Lila's note had stopped him cold. Because she had seen the truth. He was a man drowning in ghosts. The next evening, Lila avoided the diner altogether. She stayed home, sitting beside Jake as he did his homework. He glanced at her, frowning. "That guy outside, he wasn't bad, you know." "Jake," she warned. "What?" He looked like he cared. She sighed. "Caring doesn't last. People leave. You should know that better than anyone." Jake's face fell, and guilt stabbed her. She reached over, ruffling his hair. "I didn't mean it like that. I don't want you to get hurt. Not by him. Not by anyone." But later, when Jake was asleep, she sat by the window. staring out at the rain-slick streets. And for the first time, she admitted to herself what scared her most. Not that Ethan would leave, but he wouldn't. 2 nights later, Ethan waited outside the diner until Lila arrived. She stopped in her tracks when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting for you." Her jaw tightened. "You don't get to follow me. You don't get to show up where you're not invited." "Then invite me," he said quietly. The words hung heavy in the air. Her throat worked as she swallowed. "Why? Why do you care? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. His voice cracked just slightly, the way it hadn't in years. "And I know what it's like to carry someone you love on your shoulders and wonder if you're enough for them." She froze, because in that moment she realized he wasn't just talking about her. They stood in silence, the night air cool around them. Lila finally whispered, "I don't want pity." "It's not a pity." Ethan stepped closer, his gaze steady. "It's recognition." Her chest tightened. She wanted to step back, to run, but her feet stayed rooted, and in his eyes, she saw it, the same exhaustion, the same fear, the same relentless determination she carried every day for Jake. 2 different worlds. Same weight, same scars. She looked away quickly, blinking hard. Don't do this." "Do what?" "Make me want something I can't have." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He wanted to tell her everything. About his brother. About the guilt that haunted him. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he just said, "Maybe we're both lonelier than we want to admit." Her eyes softened, just for a second. Then the mask slipped back into place. "I have to work," and she walked inside, leaving him standing in the dark. Chapter 6. Emotional Bonding. 3 nights later, Ethan walked into the diner again. This time he didn't wait for Lila to acknowledge him. He simply slid into his usual booth. She walked over, pad in hand, lips pressed into a tight line. "You're persistent." "I prefer determined," he said, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Her eyes flicked up at him, suspicious, but something in his tone softened her stance. "What do you want tonight?" she asked flatly. He leaned forward. "For you to sit with me." She blinked. "This is a diner, not a date." "Then call it a break. Just 5 minutes." Her first instinct was to say no, but Jake's words echoed in her mind. He looked like he cared, so against her better judgment, she slid into the booth across from him. For a while, they sat in silence. Lila fiddled with the pen in her hand, Ethan watching her with a quiet intensity that made her chest tighten. Finally, he spoke. "That night, the note. Why did you write it?" She shrugged, not meeting his eyes. "You looked like someone who needed to hear it." "What gave me away?" She glanced up then, her voice softening despite herself. "Your eyes. They looked tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes." Ethan swallowed hard. Few people ever looked past the surface, but she had. "And you?" he asked gently. "Who tells you what you need to hear?" Her laugh was brittle. "No one." Something in Ethan's chest cracked. Their food came. Lila had ordered him his usual steak without asking. When she set it down, Ethan smirked. "You assume a lot." "I pay attention," she said, arching a brow. "Clearly." For the first time since they'd met, she smiled. Really smiled. It lit her face, and Ethan found himself grinning back before he even realized it. The sound of her laugh, low, unguarded, was like music he hadn't heard in years. And at that moment, the diner didn't feel like a dingy escape anymore. It felt like the only place that mattered. After her shift, Ethan offered to walk her home. She started to refuse, but when she saw the sincerity in his eyes, she nodded. The night air was cool, the street lamps casting long shadows. They walked in silence until Ethan finally asked, "Your brother?" He seemed happy. Lila's lips curved faintly. He's my whole world. Since our parents left, it's been just me and him. Left? She nodded, voice quiet. One day, they just didn't come back. I was 19. Jake was barely 7. I've been figuring it out ever since. Ethan's heart clenched. She carried a weight most people would never survive. You're stronger than you think, he murmured. She glanced at him, her throat tight. Or maybe I'm just too stubborn to quit. He smiled softly. Maybe that's the same thing. A week later, Ethan showed up outside her building, not in his sleek car this time, but on foot holding a paper bag. What's this? Lila asked warily. Dinner. For you and Jake. Inside were takeout containers from a small Italian place, and to Jake's delight, a box of cannoli. Are you bribing us? Lila teased, though her voice was lighter than usual. Maybe, Ethan said with a grin. That night they ate together at her small table, laughter filling the cramped apartment. Jake animatedly told Ethan about school, and Ethan listened like it was the most important conversation in the world. For the first time in years, Lila realized, the apartment didn't feel heavy. It felt like home. After Jake went to bed, Ethan and Lila sat on the fire escape with mugs of tea. The city hummed softly below them. Do you ever regret it? Ethan asked quietly. What? Staying. Taking care of him. When you could have chosen yourself. Lila stared at the stars, her voice trembling. Every day is hard. Some days I think I can't keep going. But then Jake laughs. And it's worth everything. He saved me as much as I saved him. Ethan turned his head, studying her profile in the glow of the streetlight. You don't know it, he whispered, but you're extraordinary. Her breath caught. She didn't answer, but her fingers, resting on the railing, brushed against his. She didn't pull away. Another night over coffee, Lila asked, So what about you? You ask all these questions, but you never talk about yourself. Ethan hesitated. He could tell her the truth, that he was a millionaire, that he lived in a world so different from hers it would shatter everything between them. But looking at her, at the way she listened without judgment, he longed for just one thing. To be ordinary, he said softly. She tilted her head, studying him. You say that like you're anything but. And he almost broke them, almost told her everything. But instead he just smiled. One evening, after walking her home, they lingered by her door. The air between them was thick, charged. Lila looked up at him, her lips parting. Ethan leaned down just enough that he could feel her breath. His heart pounded, but then Jake's voice called from inside. Lila? She stepped back quickly, cheeks flushed. Good night, Ethan. And she closed the door before he could answer. Ethan stood there, chest aching with something that felt dangerously like hope. That night, Lila lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her heart raced at the memory of how close they'd been, how badly she'd wanted to close the gap, but the fear was louder. She couldn't afford this. Not with a man who could leave at any moment. Not when Jake depended on her to be steady, not broken. And yet, she knew deep down, she already wanted him. Chapter 7. The Shatter Point. It was a Thursday evening, and the diner buzzed with the usual dinner crowd. Ethan slipped into his booth, expecting to see Lila come over with her guarded smile. But before she could, another voice rang out. Ethan, there you are. Lila froze mid-step. A woman in designer heels, sleek hair, and a diamond bracelet strode toward his booth. She leaned down, kissed his cheek, and slid into the seat beside him like she belonged there. Do you know how many meetings you've missed this week? The woman said sharply. You disappear, and the board is furious. You can't keep doing this, Ethan. You're a Caldwell. Lila's heart plummeted. Caldwell. Her pen slipped from her fingers. Every diner's head turned toward the glamorous woman. And Ethan. Ethan looked like the air had been sucked from his lungs. Ethan Caldwell? Lila's voice cracked as she finally found her words. The woman turned, giving Lila a once-over. "Who's this?" she asked coldly. "No one," Ethan said quickly, voice tight. "Just—" But the damage was done. Lila's chest squeezed painfully like all the air had been ripped away. No one. After weeks of late-night talks, of walks home, of laughter over Jake's silly jokes, she was no one. Her vision blurred as she spun on her heel, rushing toward the kitchen doors. "Lila, wait!" Ethan called after her, but his voice felt like an echo. She shoved through the back door, gasping for breath. The cool night air stung her cheeks, mixing with the tears already streaming down. Footsteps pounded behind her. "Lila!" She whirled on him, voice breaking. Don't you dare follow me. Please, let me explain." "Explain?" She laughed bitterly. "Explain how you let me believe you were just some quiet man who liked steak and late-night walks? Explain how you sat at my table in my world, pretending you understood anything about me when all along you're, what, a millionaire? A Caldwell?" He flinched at the venom in her voice. "I wanted to tell you." "You should have." Her anger shook with something deeper, betrayal. "Do you have any idea what this feels like? All these weeks I thought I saw you. I thought maybe you saw me. But you were just playing a game, weren't you?" "It wasn't a game," Ethan whispered, his throat tight. "I came here because I was tired of being Caldwell, tired of people who only cared about my money. And then I met you, and for the first time in years I felt—" "Don't." She cut him off, her tears burning hot. "Don't you dare say it. You lied. That's all that matters." Her voice cracked as she added, "Jake loves you. He trusted you. And I let you into our lives because I thought—" She broke off, covering her mouth with a shaking hand. Ethan reached for her, but she stepped back like his touch was poison. "Stay away from us," she choked out, and then she disappeared into the night. Ethan stood frozen, his chest hollow. For years he had built walls to protect himself, but somehow she had slipped past them, and now, losing her felt like losing breath itself. The woman from earlier, his cousin Rebecca, came out the back door. "You can't keep doing this, Ethan. Slumming it in diners with waitresses. You're Caldwell. People are watching." He turned on her, voice raw. "Get out." She blinked, startled. "I said get out." His roar echoed off the brick walls filled with anguish, but when she left, he was still alone, more alone than he had ever been. Back in her apartment, Lila collapsed against the door, clutching her chest. Jake looked up from the couch, confusion etched on his small face. "Lila? What happened? Where's Ethan?" She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He's not coming back, Jake." The boy frowned. "Why? Did he do something wrong?" Her throat tightened. She couldn't tell him the truth, not when Jake had finally felt like he had a brother. "Sometimes," she whispered, stroking his hair, "people aren't who we think they are." That night she lay awake in the dark, heart shattered, whispering the same words to herself like a curse. Chapter 8. The Spiral. Days turned into weeks. Ethan stopped coming to the diner. Lila buried herself in shifts, her eyes dull, her smile gone. The regulars noticed, but she brushed them off. At night, she lay in bed listening to Jake's soft breathing and wondered how she had been foolish enough to believe a man like Ethan could ever belong in their world. Meanwhile, Ethan locked himself in his penthouse, ignoring calls from the board, ignoring Rebecca's lectures. He replayed every moment with Lila, every smile, every laugh, the way she had looked at him before she knew, the way she had looked at him after, and the silence of her absence was unbearable. One night, Ethan found himself driving aimlessly through the city, ending up outside the diner. Through the window, he saw her. She was wiping down tables, hair falling from its tie, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She looked older, sadder, and it killed him, because he knew he had put that look there. He almost went in. His hand was on the door, but then he saw Jake run out from the kitchen, hugging her legs. She smiled faintly, ruffled his hair, and Ethan knew he didn't belong there anymore. So he turned, and he walked away. Weeks passed. Lila learned to function without him, but her chest still ached whenever she passed the booth where he used to sit. Jake still asked sometimes, "Do you think Ethan's okay?" She forced a smile. "He'll be fine. People like him. They always are." But when she was alone, she broke. Because no matter how much she tried to hate him, she couldn't forget the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. And Ethan, sitting in his cold penthouse, surrounded by everything money could buy, couldn't forget the warmth of her laugh. They were apart, and both were more broken than before. Chapter 9. The Choice. The days had bled into weeks, and still, the diner booth sat empty. Lila tried not to look at it anymore, but her eyes betrayed her. Every shift, every night, her gaze flicked there, searching for him. And every time, her heart reminded her, he wasn't coming back. She told herself it was for the best. Men like Ethan Caldwell lived in towers of glass and steel, not in peeling apartments with second-hand furniture. He belonged to a world that was sharp, shiny, and cruel. But still, she missed him. At night, when Jake was asleep, she would sit at the kitchen table and reread the note she had given Ethan that first night. "I see you." She had meant it, but had he ever really seen her? Meanwhile, Ethan wandered through the vast emptiness of his penthouse. Everything gleamed, marble floors, glass walls, sleek leather. It should have felt like success. Instead, it felt like a cage. He couldn't stop hearing her voice, trembling, angry, hurt. "You lied. That's all that matters." He poured himself a glass of whiskey and stared out at the skyline. Skyscrapers glittered, but none of them warmed him. Rebecca had stopped coming by. The board had stopped calling. For the first time, Ethan realized he could lose everything and not care, except her. It was Lila's absence that hollowed him. One rainy afternoon, Jake tugged on Lila's sleeve as she folded laundry. "Lila?" His small voice was tentative. "Yes, buddy?" He fiddled with the hem of his shirt. "Do you think Ethan misses us?" The question cut her open. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to smile. "I'm sure he's busy. People like him don't stay in one place for long." Jake frowned, but he promised he'd take me to the Science Museum. He said he would. "Do promises not matter to rich people?" Lila blinked fast, her throat burning. "No, honey, promises matter. Maybe he just forgot." But deep down she knew. Ethan hadn't forgotten. He had been too afraid to come back. That night, Ethan dreamt of the diner. In the dream, Lila stood by his booth, smiling at him the way she used to, eyes filled with quiet trust. He reached for her, and she dissolved into smoke. He woke with a start, chest heaving, the sheets damp with sweat. Enough. He couldn't do this anymore. He grabbed his phone, scrolled to her number, the one she had scribbled on a napkin for emergencies when Jake had gotten sick. He had kept it, though he'd never used it. His thumb hovered. But what could he say? "I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I'm me." He set the phone down, burying his face in his hands. The fear of losing her forever battled the fear of being rejected again. Chapter 10. The Whisper of a Note. At the diner the next night, Lila found something strange. On the counter by the register lay a folded piece of paper with her name written on it in neat, familiar handwriting. Her breath caught. She unfolded it with trembling hands. It read, "I'm still the man who loved sitting at your booth. Not the Caldwell name, not the money. Just me. Please let me prove it. E." Her knees nearly buckled. She shoved the note into her apron, heart pounding, eyes darting toward the empty booth. But he wasn't there. That night, Lila sat on her bed, the note in her lap. Her mind screamed at her, "Don't be foolish again." He lied. He hid who he was. He belongs in a world that chews people like you up. But her heart whispered. He came back. He reached out. He wants to prove himself. She pressed the paper to her chest, whispering to the silence, "What if he hurts us again?" And yet, the part of her that remembered his laughter with Jake, the softness in his eyes when he looked at her, ached for one more chance. Ethan sat in his car across from the diner the next evening, staring at the glow of its neon sign. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. "Go in," he muttered to himself. "Just go in." But what if she turned him away? What if she looked at him with that same betrayal in her eyes? Then he saw her through the window. She was laughing with an elderly customer, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. And suddenly he knew, if he didn't go in now, he would lose her forever. He opened the car door. The diner bell chimed as Ethan stepped inside. The room hushed slightly, eyes turning toward the tall man in the tailored coat. Lila froze mid-pour, the coffee pot trembling in her hand. Their eyes met across the room. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Then she set the pot down, straightened her apron, and walked over. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her storm. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to be," Ethan said quietly. "I can't stay away anymore." She folded her arms. "You lied to me, Ethan. To Jake. Do you think a note fixes that?" "No," he admitted, voice low. "Nothing I say will erase what I did. I was a coward. I didn't trust you enough to tell you who I was, and I hated myself for it every day." Her throat tightened. He took a breath, stepping closer. "But Lila, you're the only person who's ever seen me. Not Caldwell, not money, just me. And I'm terrified of losing that forever." Her heart hammered. She searched his eyes, raw and pleading. And in that moment, the choice hovered between them. Chapter 11. Resolution. The diner seemed quieter than usual. Lila stood rooted, her arms folded tightly against her chest as Ethan's words hung between them. Customers glanced curiously at the pair, sensing the tension, but pretending not to. Ethan's eyes, usually so unreadable, glistened with unguarded vulnerability. For once, the man who had commanded boardrooms and media headlines looked as if he might break under the weight of her silence. Lila's pulse thundered. She remembered that first night, the simple steak order, the folded note she'd slipped him without knowing who he was. She remembered the way his eyes had softened, as though he had been waiting his whole life to be seen. And here he was, waiting again. Her voice came out low, almost trembling. "You don't get to just walk back in here and expect me to forget." "I don't," Ethan said quickly, shaking his head. "I don't expect you to forget. I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But I had to come. I had to try because you and Jake, you're the only real thing I've ever had." Her breath caught. "Ethan," she whispered, but words tangled in her throat. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't care if it takes years to earn your trust again. I'll show up. I'll wait. I'll prove that I can be the man you deserve, not the one who lied to you." Something inside her cracked. The dam she had built to protect herself. The walls she had clung to. Because despite everything, she could feel the truth in him. The bell over the diner door jingled. "Lila!" Jake came bounding in, his small backpack bouncing on his shoulders. He stopped short when he spotted Ethan, eyes widening. "Ethan?" The boy's voice was filled with hope and confusion. Lila's heart twisted. This was the moment she had feared. The questions. The hurt. Jake ran up to them, his gaze darting between their faces. "You disappeared. You said you'd take me to the museum. Did you forget?" Ethan dropped to one knee, meeting Jake's eyes at level. His voice was hoarse. "I didn't forget, buddy. I messed up. I thought I wasn't good enough to be around you and your sister, so I ran. But that was wrong. And I'm sorry." Jake's frown softened into something gentler. He looked at Lila, then back at Ethan. Do you still want to go? Ethan blinked rapidly, his chest tight. More than anything. Jake broke into a grin and threw his arms around Ethan's neck. And just like that, the boy forgave him in the way only children could. Lila's eyes stung. She covered her mouth, watching as Ethan held Jake, his face pressed into the boy's shoulder. He looked up at her, tears shimmering. I love him, he whispered. And I love you. Please let me stay. Her body trembled. Fear and longing clashed inside her, but when she looked at them together, she knew. This wasn't about wealth or power. This was about the man who had laughed with her over burnt pie, who had slipped notes under her coffee cup, who had seen her strength when no one else did. She stepped forward, voice breaking. I can't promise it will be easy, Ethan. I can't promise I won't get scared again. His expression softened. Then let's be scared together. For the first time in weeks, she let herself smile through her tears. And then, in the middle of the diner, she reached for his hand. The choice was made. Chapter 12. Healing. The following weeks weren't perfect, but they were real. Ethan showed up, again and again. He came to Jake's school play, cheering louder than anyone. He helped Lila fix the leaky faucet in her apartment, fumbling with the wrench until they were both laughing. He didn't sweep her into a mansion or shower her with diamonds. He simply stayed. And little by little, trust began to grow again. Sometimes Lila still questioned. She'd wake in the night and wonder if he'd vanish again. But every morning there he was, making coffee badly but trying anyway. And Ethan found himself becoming someone new. He still ran his company, still signed contracts, but he no longer wore the mask. When he was with Lila, he was just a man who loved a woman and her brother, and it was enough. One crisp autumn evening, Ethan led Lila and Jake back to the diner, the place where it had all begun. The booths were filled, the neon buzzing, the smell of fried onions in the air. Why here? Lila asked, puzzled. Ethan guided them to the booth, their booth. On the table sat a folded napkin. Her heart skipped. He nodded for her to open it. Hands shaking, she unfolded the napkin. Inside, in his familiar handwriting, were the same 3 words she had once written to him. I see you. But underneath, he had added, forever, if you'll let me. When she looked up, Ethan was holding out a small box. Not flashy, not ostentatious. Inside was a simple silver band, elegant and timeless. Lila's eyes filled. Yes, she whispered before he could even ask. Jake whooped, clapping his hands. Does this mean we're a family now? Ethan laughed, scooping him up with one arm and pulling Lila into the other. Yes, buddy. It means exactly that. Epilogue. Love at last. Months later, the 3 of them stood in the courtyard of a small chapel. No paparazzi, no media. Just a handful of close friends. The autumn wind and vows whispered through tears. Lila wore a simple dress, her smile radiant. Ethan held her hands as though they were the most precious thing he had ever owned. When the words were spoken and the rings exchanged, he leaned close and murmured the phrase that had tied them from the start. I see you. She smiled through tears. And I see you. Jake cheered louder than anyone, his little voice carrying through the crisp air. And in that moment, under the fading light, their story was no longer one of secrets or lies. It was one of love, unexpected, fragile, but stronger than either of them had ever dreamed. The end. What do you think, friends? Was Lila right to forgive Ethan and take the risk of love again? Or would you have walked away forever? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your heart.